Ori, you want to talk about the 6 levels of delegation today?
I definitely want to talk about the 6 level delegation, Amy. Thank you.
Awesome. So remember when we first started with less doing and we'd meet with people and the most of the entrepreneurs would be like, no, I got this. Like I'm in it, I'm head down, and I got it. I know, right? And it's the grind and I got it. And why would that make you cringe so hard?
I had a particular issue with people saying that they've been head down to me because, like, the thing about how like working your butt off and grinding all this stuff is like a badge of honor. That's kind of a stupid one. Is been played out ad nauseum. But there's something very specific about saying that, oh yeah, sorry I didn't respond to your email for the last 3 months, or like this, I've been head down. It's just an excuse, basically. You're saying like you just couldn't handle your shit. That's basically what you're saying at that point. And so you decided to just shut off everything and just hope for the best. Let the fires burn, as Reid Hoffman likes to say, except in this case, you were just being incompetent. So anybody ever says that they've been head down, I find that to be just so frustrating. And I immediately know that I'm dealing with somebody who has absolutely no idea what they're doing. It doesn't mean they're a bad person, but they clearly have no clue because they're using a buzzword as an excuse. So, and the biggest issue that we find is that the replaceability idea that we talk about, that I talk about, and we've taught about together for such a long time, hits people very quickly. And what I mean by that is that when you start a company and you grow a company and build a company and grow leadership systems and teams around you, you become less and less valuable in the role that you are currently playing day by day. Right, so there's a joke in the Dilbert comic that's been around for a long time, but it's actually very accurate, which is the Peter Principle. Do you remember the Peter Principle?
You rise to the level of your incompetence.
Exactly. So essentially the idea is that people are promoted to a job of a higher value or a higher requirement or demand based on their performance in a lower level or lower demand, and eventually people get promoted to the point of obsolescence. So there's actually a lot of validity to that. And that is certainly one path that people can take. So with entrepreneurs and founders particularly, what we find is that when they start a company, whether or not it's a truly innovative idea or not, or they're just rehashing the next kind of, sales funnel, the uniqueness that they bring to it is there. And if you think of, actually you think about this like almost like potential and kinetic energy, right? If anybody remembers physics, right? So something, if I take if my phone is sitting on the table here, it has very, very little, it has potential energy, but very, very little kinetic energy, essentially. And as I pick it up off the table, the potential energy gets higher and higher. And if I let go of it, then the kinetic energy starts to build as it falls, and the potential energy goes away, and there's that conversion. So when you start a company, you have a lot of kinetic energy, a lot of things happening. But as the company starts to grow around you and build, and you get 10 times the amount of customers you had before and 10 times the amount of employees that you had before, you're building up all this in potential energy, and you're not using as much of the kinetic energy, essentially, because it's just, there's no reason for you to. And the problem is that entrepreneurs claw onto that, and they hold the company back to their level, in essence, of obsolescence, is what's really happening. And it has to do with ego. It's 100% an ego thing. And if you don't start to look at how you can become replaceable, you don't rise with the company, right? Because you end up holding on to those things, and you create a culture around that where people continue to do that. So delegation is leadership. Delegation is communication. And delegation is about empowerment. So, yeah.
Because you just said this phrase that I think is really poignant in this discussion, which is you're building a company around you as if you are the center of that company, which is the wrong way to look at delegation, because you're not the sun and your employees aren't the planets. The world doesn't operate because you got up. The world operates because you have a system in place that makes things move, which is why the 6 levels of delegation is not an orbital thing. It's a process thing, right?
Right, exactly. And the problem that we so often see with delegation is that people sort of inherently view it as a very binary thing, meaning either I have to do everything or somebody else has to do everything. And neither of those are good scenarios, and neither of those are necessarily things that we're comfortable with. But the default in that case is, well, I'm just going to do everything then because at least I can control that. And this is a completely subconscious conversation that happens with people. What I have taught over the years is that there's actually 6 levels of delegation that you should view tasks through, and also the way that you end up actually dialing in the level of empowerment for people. And so the important thing to understand and I have a graphic that we're going to show in a minute, but the important thing to understand about this is that it's not that level 1 is better than level 6 or vice versa. Any one of these levels is applicable to any task or project that you might assign. It's completely dependent on the task itself and what that means to you, the person you're delegating to, and the level of comfort you have with being able to offload that. So you can get it all done, but understanding what that level is and what the playground looks like essentially for you and the person you're giving it to is extremely important.
So do you think the playground is, before you go on to it, do you think the playground is your processes, your systems and processes in your business that you can simply slot delegation into, or is it converse? Is it the other way around?
Yeah, so right, not necessarily. I wouldn't see it that way because, as you know, and as some of our listeners at this point would probably know, is the framework is OAO, right? Optimize, automate, then outsource. And so, and look, I'm somebody who's outsourced and delegated thousands of hours, thousands of dollars of things in every kind of field you can imagine, but I am constantly trying to avoid outsourcing because as soon as we get people involved, we're just opening ourselves up to a lack of engagement, to errors, to all sorts of issues. So automation is really where we want to start. So it's not necessarily that we want to slot the outsourcees or the providers into those processes if we can automate them or, of course, optimize them entirely. So if we think about outsourcing and delegating as a way of not just getting stuff done that we don't want to do or can't do, but as a way of empowering individuals to really take ownership over the things that need to get done in the business in order to grow it, really, it kind of changes that conversation. So it's not that we're looking for those opportunities per se. Either we have the people in the company and we need to make them more replaceable by moving them up, not out. So we want to replace people up, not firing them necessarily, although it does happen. And then if we have to bring people in that have talents that in-house people don't have, how we do that in an effective manner. Because one more thing I'd like to say before we show the graphic is that, as we talked about in the inbox zero discussion, when you delegate something, you should see that as you being done at that time. You're done with the activity because you've delegated in a way that there's really nothing else for you to do in the process until either they finish it or they come back to you with some sort of a clarification or issue. But if we look at delegation in that way, that like I'm done delegating and now I'm done. The only way to do that is if we do it in an effective manner and communicate what needs to get done properly. And that's what this framework helps people do. So let's pull up this graphic. And as you can see, we go from level 1 to level 6. So I'm going to explain the levels really quickly, and then we can sort of talk about some practical examples of what that looks like. So level 1 is what we call perform, right? Do what I say. Now, there is no empowerment here. There's no opinion asking. We're not really engaging somebody in this process. It's button pushing in some cases. Buy this book on Amazon, right? And so what that means, if I'm saying level 1, is I don't want another version of it. I don't want a different price of it. It's like, just go buy this exact thing that I'm telling you. And if it's not that, then come back to me. Basically, like, I don't want you to think on your own or do anything autonomous. So what's really important about this level is that, first of all, you might do this with somebody who you've never worked with before and you want to sort of test out how things go. But this is a two-way process, a two-way communication street, as it were. And what I'm telling somebody if I delegate at level 1 is, there's really nothing that you can do wrong here. And I want you to involve me. You're not going to annoy me if you come back to me and be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I couldn't get the thing. It's like, I'm not going to be like, what's wrong with you? Why? Because I delegated at level 1, right? So there is no empowerment, but at the same time, there's really no risk, right? So you either do it or you can't do it and you come back to me and I have to hold your hand through it. What you don't want to see, if you're not doing it this way, right, is that somebody who delegates to someone else and that person doesn't feel empowered, they don't feel like they have any autonomy, and then they have to keep coming back to their boss, be like, oh, what color did you want? Oh, but it's this price, not this price. Oh, they don't have the aisle seat that you wanted. And you get this sort of mismatch in communication where that person delegated it and they don't want to hear about it again. And so now every time that person comes back to them, they're just getting annoyed. And they're like, oh, this person's incompetent. And that's why whenever I ask people, how many of you ever had a bad experience outsourcing something? When I ask the audiences, everybody raises their hand. Everybody has had a bad experience outsourcing, and it's your fault.
So this is purely transactional. This is baseline transactional. It should be simple, but so should the instructions. The instructions should be as clear, and you should also anticipate the notion of, well, what color? I want this in purple. I don't just want this book. I want this book in purple. So the instructions have to be clear in order for the person to even perform the task.
Right. Now, and this is also a situation where you might have already gone through my process for optimizing a process, and you have a perfect process that just needs to be followed to the letter, right? So there's no interpretation in this process at all. You literally just go step 1, step 2, step whatever it is, and push the buttons, basically. Number 2 is investigate. So look into it for me. So I still wouldn't necessarily consider this a level where you're empowering people per se, but at least at this point, you're giving them just a taste of a little bit of autonomy, right? So in this case, it could be, hey, I need a book on X, right? I need a book on delegating. I need a book on leadership. I think that it should be written in the last 20 years and have this research, but otherwise you find what you can. But I'm not asking the person to execute on this necessarily. This is investigate. So this is, you come back to me with what you found, and then we'll go from there. Again, you often have this issue, this sort of mismatch of expectations between a delegator and a delegatee, where the amount of communication that you want to have is not explicitly stated. And again, that's what this corrects. But if I were to tell an assistant, like, hey, get me a flight to, the Pocono, or well, I wouldn't fly there, to some island somewhere, right? And I don't give a lot of details or whatever. In my head, maybe I'm like, you know what? They're going to go look. They'll come back to me. I'll say, yeah, I like that seat. They'll go back. They'll come back. They get my credit card. And I'm okay with that back and forth. Maybe the other person, though, getting this instruction is like, I don't want to bother them. Like, they're going to think I don't know what I'm talking about if I ask this question. And you have this, like, you create a silo between the person that's supposed to be doing the thing for you and the person giving those instructions. And what can end well. So this is investigate. This is you look into it, come back to me, give me what you found. But I'm still going to make the decision, or maybe I'm going to redelegate something to you at level 1, whatever it might be. And at the end of this, by the way, we're going to talk about what this looks like in practice. Now, number 3 is where we're just starting to show some empowerment. This is recommend, right? So this is you look into it and you give me your opinion. Wow, right? Now I want to actually get an opinion. And I'm not saying that to sound like a jerk. It's like, before this, we weren't asking for an opinion, but now we want one, right? And there's value in that, obviously, because everybody's going to have a sort of different perspective on things. So if I asked 3 different people, give me the best book you can on leadership, theoretically, the 3 of them might get 3 different things, right? So but still, I'm not telling them to execute. I'm not saying buy it. I'm not saying just come back to me with what you think we should do. Now we jump the line here, or we get over the peak and we get to conclude, which is level 4. So this is decide and inform me. So there is a really old consulting model, which is called the RACI model, RACI. And this refers to the different roles that people have in different projects and tasks. RACI would be, or R would be responsible, A would be accountable, C would be consulted, and I would be informed, right? So these are, and in many cases, you want to be the informed one, right? You don't want to have anything to do with the decision or the consulting or the time required to do that. You just want to be told this is what we're doing. So that's what level 4 is. You conclude. So you make a decision, then just let me know the graphics on this. So this would be hey, I want a book on leadership, right? So now this person goes, they buy the book, and they're like, hey, I ordered the book on leadership. It'll be here tomorrow. And you can, at that point, be like, that's not really the one I wanted. So, like, let's try again. Or, okay, great. I've been informed. Thank you. And now we're really starting to allow for some empowerment, right? Because at this point, we've created a scenario in which they can act autonomously. We are asking for their opinion and bringing them into that process as well. And for something like the book, and I know this is like a very simple example, it could be anything. It could be, sign us up for a new CRM or deal with my taxes, whatever it is. At this point, though, we are engaging them in the process to the point that they have something vested in the outcome, right? Because if we say level 4, now the issue with the delegation is really shifted in a good way. The issue is no longer, did they buy the right book? Or did they purchase it correctly and make it easier for me because I wouldn't have been able to buy it without them? The issue now becomes like, I read the book and it didn't really help me very much. But that's not on them, but they're involved in that process, right? Level 5 is my second favorite, not surprisingly, which is decide. And this is explore and decide within these limits. Now, this is a really interesting one that can make a huge difference in the way that your business operates, or rather, whether or not your business operates efficiently. So the limits in this case could be a dollar amount, it could be a time, it could be a space, whatever it might be. But pretty typical what we'll see in this situation is that, for example, in a business, any decision that's less than $500 doesn't require any other oversight, right? Or maybe it's 1,000 in your business, maybe it's 50, it doesn't matter what it is. But if this decision is less than X amount of dollars, I don't need to know about it. You just do the thing, get it done. So this one is a really good one because you can preempt a lot of delays and bottlenecks that might happen in your business with something like this. And it could be giving refunds, right? So maybe you have a service and some client isn't happy and they want a $150 refund. Do you really want, do you want that to come to your attention if it's something really that minor and maybe you're selling multi-$1,000 products, but this $150 thing is something that somebody's going to bring to you? Or worse, do you want, you're on vacation for 3 days or 4 days and your team waits till you get back and now this customer who just wanted a $150 refund is now written all over social media and bashed your company and is really, really pissed off? No, of course not. So if we set in advance, this is a number that I'm comfortable with you operating within, I don't even know about otherwise. And then level 6. Level 6. How many times, Amy, have you ever sent me a message and I've responded with L6? So,
yeah, I think since like the second month.
Mm-hmm. So this is achieve, right? So if level 1 is just do what I say, level 6 is just get it done. Take care of it for me. And this is an interesting one for a couple of different reasons as well. Level 6 is saying, you do what you have to do. I don't care what it costs, who you have to talk to, where you have to go, just make it happen, which is great and obviously requires a lot of trust. Or it also is a scenario where you might be delegating to somebody who has knowledge that you just don't have any of. Like if you were going to hire somebody to do genealogical research and you just don't know nothing about that, then you're going to say, like, look, you're an expert in your field. You come highly recommended. I'm putting my trust in you. Don't ask me questions that I don't know the answer to. Just make it happen. But what this is really saying is that not only am I trusting you to do what you need to do and operate the way you want to operate, I'm also telling you that I am going to get out of your way because my involvement in the process at this point would do nothing but hinder it, which is a big admission and a very important one. And in the examples that I'm talking about with Amy, there were plenty of times, well, I wouldn't say plenty because I think you got the idea pretty quickly. But there were times when you would email me and be like, do you want to write this blog post about this or this? And I'd say, like, you're the writer, you know the voice, you know this better than me, L6, right? Or like, I think this came up a couple of times when we were doing some of the books. It's like, do you want this cover or this color or whatever? It's like L6, right? It takes me 3 seconds to say L6. And then what that also says to Amy in that scenario is like, she can't mess up, right? Because I am saying I trust her. And if for some reason the result is something I don't like, that's on me. And the only fix to that is that next time, maybe I don't do that. but that's okay. And there's no recourse to Amy for that or for the person in that scenario. So level 6 is a very sort of special scenario. It doesn't mean that you can't operate at that level all the time. And as I said, level 6 is not better than level 1. All you're doing is level setting essentially and making it very, very clear to both sides of the arrangement what you are expecting of each other.
So to me, it's kind of fascinating because it's the greatest onboarding process there is, right? Like, if a person, it's a great way to mark someone's development as a partner, as an employee, as a vendor, whatever. If level 1, if you're stuck in level 1 all the time with this one particular person, that doesn't mean that that person is useless. It means that you understand the parameters of the relationship are going to be pretty binary and transactional, right? So it's not like, oh, I hope someday I get to be level 6. I mean, it's not. I want people to understand that it's, this isn't, we're not on a podium here. We're not trying to, it's not a medal event. We're not trying to get to level 6 in everything, right? And not everyone should.
And level 6 is completely inappropriate for certain tasks and scenarios as well.
So give me an example of what would be totally inappropriate to say level 6. Because it feels so badass to go like, hey man, level 6. And that's inappropriate sometimes.
Yeah. So I think that so a lot of that would be, I think, timing, honestly. So one would be if you're working with somebody brand new, maybe, although again, if you're getting like, a funnel designer or a graphic designer who's highly recommended from somebody else, there really isn't, it's almost insulting, I would say at that point for you to be like, I know that you're the world expert, but I saw this funnel that looked like this, and that's what I think we should do. Like, then go hire somebody at level 1 who's going to be a lot cheaper to do the thing you want them to do, rather than recognizing talent in that scenario. I think that one of the areas that would be inappropriate for level 6 would be things that have to do with real leadership development and growth, right? So it would be inappropriate for me to bring someone in to do like a company vision or a mission or something and just level 6 that, right? And be like, no, you do you. It's like, well, no, because then I'm not bought into the process, right? So, and we see that where people try to do that kind of thing. Well, they'll outsource things that they don't personally care about, even though they are really important to the business.
Say that one more time. They'll outsource things. Go ahead.
That they don't personally care about, but that are really important. And I personally never cared very much about crafting our vision statement. And as the COO, Courtney at the time, she really spearheaded that. But I was involved in the process, even though it didn't personally resonate with me, but I recognize the importance of it.
Right. That's the key to all of these steps of it's once again, it's that ego thing, right? Doesn't emanate, not everything springs from the founder, right?
Right. Well, you can't use level 6 as a way of checking out, right? You can't use that as a way of going head down, right? Like, I'm going to go head down and do this thing for the next 3 months. So level 6, everybody, because that's creating is a leadership vacuum, and that's not what we're trying to do.
That's a really good distinction. I really like that idea, that it's not that whole like, my whole team's on level 6 as some kind of a flex, right?
Correct. Now, as I said, level 6 is sort of a big departure in some ways from level 5. Level 5, I think, is a very comfortable place for a lot of people to be able to operate, right? So it's like, and one of the things that I think I always prided myself on, and you by all means have any commentary you want on this, I've always felt that with people that were working with me, that I wanted to overload them with work and tasks and projects while simultaneously giving them all of the resources necessary to be able to get that stuff done, right? So if that meant you needed to hire an assistant or you needed to sign up for some service or whatever it was, I wanted to provide that so that we could get more done with less resources, essentially. But that's level 5 in a lot of ways, right? It's like, I'm gonna give you, this is just a random example, but like, Amy, I need you to write 4 books by next week. But, by level 5 that any decision under $500, you can do what you want. So I would imagine you would probably hire a whole bunch of writers and sign up for a bunch of copywriting services and stuff and get it done if you had to do it.
Right.
which forces innovation down through the organization.
Yes, but there's this interesting kind of conundrum in all of this, because I remember when I first came on, I first of all was the oldest and the least tech savvy, right? And
Yes.
you said to everybody, because I was feigning, I was doing that fawning thing. I don't know how to do this. Scary. I don't know how to do this. And you made a rule that no one was allowed to help me.
It wasn't a rule. It was one time you asked for help, and I said in the entire group, nobody helped her.
Okay, so that sort of became a rule because you signed the paychecks, right? No one's allowed to help Amy. And, I was like, God, you're the worst, blah, blah, blah. But it was actually the best kind of delegation, because you said to me, people a lot smarter than you built all of these platforms. You can't break anything. I just want you to go in there and make it your own and screw around. And I mean, that level of empowerment, I don't know, what would that have been? 3? I guess that would have been 3, right? In terms of delegation. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. It would have been 3.
Well, so I just saw, I don't even know what movie it's from, but I just saw this John Wayne clip the other day, where it's a little extreme, but this is John Wayne. This kid, like, he's at the river, whatever, and this kid is in clothes and says, like, I can't swim, and so John Wayne picks him up and throws him in the water, and he starts like flailing around, and he's like, just reach out and grab a handful of water and do another one, and of course, and then like the mom runs over and she's like screaming like to help him, and the kid starts swimming and swims across the other side of the river. This would never fly today, of course. And he gets to the other side of the river, and not only is he somehow not traumatized, but he's like, I swam. And she's like, well, but how's he going to get back? He's like, well, he'll swim back. It's like, well, what if he can't? She's like, well, then you can go in and get him. And she's like, I can't swim. And he looks at her, and she runs away.
Well,
there's an element, though, but there is an element of that, right, where we have to have a bit of a corral, right, within which to operate, because otherwise, I think we see a lot of extremes of this nowadays too, where people are like so afraid of losing their job that they don't push limits ever. And then on the other side of things, we see people who just push limits, and like there's no rhyme or reason to it, and it just becomes so loosey-goosey that there's no structure anymore. So as with a lot of the things that I teach, it's always about like making the implicit explicit. And that's what we're doing here, right? So otherwise, the process of delegation for many people becomes extremely presumptive, I guess.
Right. And not knowing when it's okay to go back, when it's okay to ask a question, is the most disempowering part of having a poor system of delegation, right? You're trying to empower people slowly and surely to do it on their own, but if they constantly feel hamstrung because the world centers around you and you have to know everything, then no one's going to feel empowered about anything, right?
Correct. And I think that's, again, it's a very, very important distinction, is that outsourcing, and I use outsourcing and delegating completely interchangeably, but it really should be seen as a way of empowering individuals, because far too much of the outsourcing, especially the quote unquote sort of button pushing stuff, is very dehumanizing work that we can automate so easily now that it's just silly to do that. Which, by the way, to go back to what we said in the inbox zero stuff, delegating your email to somebody else, to me, feels like very button pushing, dehumanizing work, honestly, and shouldn't be done. So there's a lot of those misuses of delegation and outsourcing. So this hopefully allays some of that. But now let's talk about what that looks like in practical sense, right? So there is a worksheet that we had designed that goes along with this, but this is very simple to sort of put this out for somebody. And in practice, when you're starting out doing this, either when you're starting with this level, the 6 levels, or you're working with somebody for the first time who's learning this material, you should actually write this down and use these sort of templates. So the first thing we want to do is designate what's the task, right? Whether it's buying a plane ticket, setting up a new CRM, doing taxes, whatever you wanted to call it. And then the level. So is this level 1, level 5, level 6, whatever it might be. We want a date. And the date is a really interesting one in itself. So we know that most people who assign tasks are very bad at identifying a correct deadline opposed to the person who's actually doing the task. So what I like to see, the date is the date that you expect there to be some sort of significant progress, not necessarily the completion, but significant progress. So look, I need you to write something. And you, Amy, know that this is going to take you 2 weeks. I put a date of 5 days on it. That's not me being like, I expect this done in 5 days. Or, I mean, some people would do it that way. That's not what we want. This is not me saying, I expect this to be done in 5 days. What I'm saying is that in 5 days, I expect to hear some sort of progress or some sort of update of some sort. That's when I'm expecting communication from you. So then we have to identify, what does success look like, which is really important and not necessarily the same thing as what the task is, right? So this is giving people context. So how often have we seen somebody come to us, Amy, and say like, oh, I need to automate this process. And we'll say why. And the reason has absolutely nothing to do with automating the process at all, right? Like, oh, I need to automate receipts being scanned and categorized. Well, why? It's like, well, my bookkeeper switched us to a new system that requires it. It's like, well, why did you switch to a new system? There's so many questions that go into that. Why are we built? So many people like to build processes around processes that shouldn't exist anymore. So what does success look like, right? Now, in certain cases, this is going to be really obvious, right? So like the task is to buy me 2 plane tickets, right? So success looks like 2 plane tickets within these dates, within this price, in this seat, to this place, right? Maybe that's what success looks like. Maybe success looks like the cheapest possible seat you can buy to get to this thing. Basically, like, if you hit this mark, I'm going to be ecstatic. That's what success looks like to me. There's going to be a box for the resources needed. Now, this is a really fascinating one, because the way that you should look at the resources needed is what would be required for anybody, including you, to do this task. So again, let's take the plane ticket example. To buy a plane ticket, what do we need? We need a form of payment, and we need a form of identification. And then maybe we need a frequent flyer number if that's something that you have. Now, the reason that this is fascinating to me is because a lot of people will delegate this kind of stuff or do it themselves, and it's like they're starting over every time. However, if you have this designated as these resources needed for buying a plane ticket, then you can keep those in a really accessible place for the next time that somebody has to buy a plane ticket for you, or you do, right? So we need to put those things in place, because again, this is when I used to be involved in a virtual assistant company, this was one of the hardest tasks to get done for people, buying a plane ticket, because what would happen is somebody would they'd assign the task, the VA would pick it up 8 hours later and research it, get back to the client, and 8 hours later, the client would come back to them and okay it, but the price had gone up $100, right? And then we had to get up, and it was just a nightmare. So we had to put a process in place for that specifically, but the resources needed. Then we have only contact me if. Really interesting thing to think through, right? So stick with the plane ticket example, right? Only contact me if the flights are 20% more than what I said is my budget, right? Only contact me if I can't get an aisle seat, right? But if I don't put those things in there, then coupled with the level of delegation, I'm telling the person, like, if you come across this issue, handle it, right? You're going to come across a hurdle. I'm giving you the power to handle it. Don't contact me for any other reason than the ones here. And I'm not saying, by the way, I don't have to list all the reasons not to contact me. I'm only saying only contact me if. And so we actually do this as like a sheet that you can hand write out, or you can type it up and you can put it in a Trello card. Or you can, when you actually assign the task to somebody, you give them this roadmap essentially. And eventually you don't need to do it anymore because it just becomes second nature. But you have to think in terms of those categories. What does this person need for success? What does success look like? What is the level of delegation? And what is the scenario within which they should be contacting me for help, advice, guidance, whatever it might be?
And that goes smoothly into developing a process for all those things. All those things are micro processes that all have a place and all live someplace, and teaching somebody how to do a bulletproof process, right?
Yeah.
Requires a very different way of thinking than the way that we think now. But that's our next conversation, isn't it?
It sure is. Well, so that was the 6 levels of delegation. There isn't just one, there aren't two. There should be 6. And hopefully this helps people delegate in a way that not only helps get things more done for them, but empowers the individuals around them. The basic concept with the 6 levels of delegation is this. A lot of people see delegation as very binary activities, meaning they have to do it all or somebody else has to do it all. And neither of those are really good scenarios if you're trying to grow, build, and divest yourself of the tasks that you have to do on a regular basis. So what we've shown here is that there really should be seen as 6 levels of delegation, everything from just do what I say all the way to just get it done, and everything in between. And then a framework that goes along with that so that you can actually lay these out and give them to other people so that they can effectively get these things done for you. But I would say even more importantly, feel empowered in doing so. They can engage in the task. They can engage in the process of what really amounts to growing the business beyond you. And that's what the 6 level delegation really allows people to do.